Part 1. The Blind Launch. Every single breath I take feels exactly like stolen property. The air entering my lungs does not belong to me. My name is Elena. I am the most famous astronaut in human history. I was the very first female commander chosen to lead a massive mission to Mars. I lived in a world of absolute, untouchable arrogance. I truly believed my survival skills were entirely invincible. I thought my brain was a perfect, flawless machine. The global media called me the bright future of humanity. I wore my crisp, white uniform like a royal crown. I looked down on everyone around me. But my deepest, most intense disgust was directed at my own husband, Leo. He was part of my space crew. He was not a pilot or a brilliant scientist. He was just a low-level environmental engineer. He was essentially a space janitor. Leo was responsible for cleaning the air filters and managing the waste systems. He wore a heavy, dirty gray uniform. I felt incredibly embarrassed by his low rank. I completely ignored his quiet, gentle smiles. I treated him like a dark stain on my perfect, shiny reputation. The morning of the historic launch was incredibly stressful. Billions of people were watching live on global television. I sat in the main command chair, feeling absolute power. The massive rocket engines began to hum loudly beneath us. The countdown to history was quickly approaching zero. Suddenly, a bright red warning light flashed on my main computer screen. The artificial intelligence system detected a very small problem. A tiny micrometeorite had lightly struck the outer titanium hull of the ship during the fueling process. The system strongly recommended a full safety inspection. The ground control director spoke through my earpiece. He sounded very nervous. He ordered me to delay the launch for 2 hours to check the hull integrity. I stared at the red warning light. A 2-hour delay would completely ruin the primetime global television broadcast. I thought about the bright cameras and the waiting world. My massive ego completely blinded my rational mind. I refused to let a tiny rock delay my glorious moment. I firmly believed the thick titanium armor of my ship was absolutely impenetrable. I made a fatal choice. I used my Supreme Commander override code. I manually deleted the warning from the computer system. I told the ground director the sensor was just malfunctioning. I lied smoothly and confidently. I initiated the final launch sequence myself. The heavy rocket shook violently and lifted off the ground. I smiled proudly as we left the Earth's atmosphere. I thought I had successfully protected my perfect image. I thought I was a brilliant, fearless leader. I did not know I had just signed a bloody death warrant. I carried a hidden, invisible time bomb into the dark stars. Part 2. The Stellar Janitor. We floated in the silent, freezing darkness of deep space for many days. The journey to Mars was long and completely quiet. I spent all my time in the bright, comfortable command cabin. I enjoyed the massive feeling of absolute authority. I was the queen of the stars. Leo spent his days in the dark, noisy lower decks of the ship. He crawled through narrow metal tunnels. He cleaned the heavy carbon dioxide filters with his dirty hands. We rarely spoke to each other. I intentionally kept him far away from my clean, perfect workspace. One afternoon, I floated down to the lower engineering deck. I wanted to check the primary water supply levels. I moved quietly through the narrow metal corridor. I suddenly saw Leo standing near a glowing computer terminal. He was acting very strangely and looking incredibly nervous. He was not checking the water or the air filters. He was actively hacking into the secure command ventilation system. He was looking at the highly classified blueprints of my personal survival cabin. He did not have the security clearance to view those specific, restricted documents. I felt a sudden rush of pure, toxic anger. I floated forward and grabbed his shoulder roughly. He jumped in surprise and quickly hid his hands behind his back. I demanded to know what he was doing. I accused him of trying to steal my command codes. Leo looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. He stuttered quietly. He told me he was just lost in the system menus. He claimed he was looking for a broken air pipe. His weak, shaking voice sounded like a pathetic, obvious lie. I did not believe a single word. I grabbed his arm and pulled his hand into the bright light. He was holding a heavy, sharp metal wrench. My paranoid mind instantly created a terrible story. I thought he was planning to sabotage my equipment. I believed he wanted to ruin my mission out of pure jealousy. I raised my hand and slapped his face as hard as I could. The sharp sound echoed loudly in the small metal room. I ordered him to stay in the dark lower decks forever. I strictly forbade him from ever coming near the command cabin again. I threatened to lock him in the cargo hold if he disobeyed my orders. Leo touched his red cheek. He did not defend himself. He just looked at me with a profound, heartbreaking sadness. He nodded his head slowly and floated away into the dark shadows of the ship. I returned to my command cabin, feeling completely justified in my cruel actions. I thought I had successfully stopped a jealous saboteur. I thought my aggressive discipline had protected the mission. I was entirely blind to the terrifying reality. He was not studying the blueprints to kill me. Part 3. The Suffocating Cabin. The time for our long hypersleep cycle finally arrived. We needed to sleep in deep stasis for the remaining journey to Mars. I prepared my body in the private command survival cabin. The room was small, highly secure, and built behind thick, bulletproof glass doors. I wore my comfortable, light sleep clothing. I was ready to close my eyes and wake up as a hero on another planet. Suddenly, a massive, violent explosion shook the entire spaceship. The heavy metal walls groaned in absolute agony. I fell hard against the cold floor. The bright white lights instantly turned a terrifying bloody red. A loud, screaming siren filled the air. The computer system announced a catastrophic depressurization event. The ship was losing atmosphere rapidly. The cold vacuum of space was actively tearing our vessel apart. I scrambled off the floor in pure panic. I needed to manually lock the heavy glass doors of my survival cabin to protect myself. I grabbed the door handle and pulled hard. The door did not move. It was completely locked from the outside. I was entirely trapped. I looked through the thick, clear glass. I saw Leo floating in the main control room. He was staring directly at me. He was wearing his heavy gray uniform. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I screamed at him to open the door immediately. Leo did not press the emergency release button. He did not try to help me. Instead, he floated over to the main environmental control panel. He grabbed the heavy metal lever that controlled the oxygen flow to my specific cabin. He looked into my eyes with a cold, blank expression. He pulled the heavy lever down completely. The green light above my door turned dark red. He manually disabled the primary oxygen valve. Then, He reached down and violently unplugged the emergency air vent. He completely cut off my only source of breathable air. I could not believe my own eyes. My husband was actively murdering me. The air inside my small cabin instantly became thin and completely useless. I slammed my fists against the bulletproof glass. I screamed horrible, violent curses at his face. I called him a pathetic, jealous killer. My lungs burned with an intense, agonizing fire. I gasped desperately for air, but there was absolutely nothing left to breathe. Black spots danced rapidly across my vision. My legs grew incredibly weak. I slowly slid down the smooth glass door, feeling the cold floor against my skin. I stared up at Leo through the glass. He was the last thing I saw before the darkness completely consumed my mind. I passed out in a state of pure, absolute hatred. I died believing my own husband was a cruel, jealous monster who slaughtered me in the dark. Part 4. The Survivor's Testimony. I did not die in that cold, airless cabin. I woke up many months later in a bright, white hospital room on Earth. The heavy smell of strong medicine filled my nose. A team of famous doctors surrounded my bed. They smiled brightly and called me a living miracle. The doctors explained the incredible situation. The spaceship's artificial intelligence detected the massive depressurization. It automatically triggered the emergency return protocol. The ship turned around and flew back to Earth on complete autopilot. I was safely secured in my locked cabin for the entire journey. I survived the terrifying ordeal, but I suffered from mild, permanent brain damage due to the severe lack of oxygen. I also learned the dark fate of my husband. The rescue teams found Leo's body in the lower engineering deck. He was completely frozen and entirely dead. The global government treated me like a magnificent goddess. I was the brave commander who survived a catastrophic disaster in deep space. I became a symbol of human strength and endless courage. But the world demanded to know exactly what happened on that doomed ship. I stood in front of the Global Space Tribunal. Hundreds of bright cameras recorded my every word. I wore my formal white uniform, decorated with golden medals. I raised my right hand and swore to tell the absolute truth. I was ready to destroy Leo's memory completely. I testified with cold, calculated anger. I told the judges that Leo was a jealous, unstable, and deeply pathetic man. I explained how I caught him studying the restricted command blueprints. I painted a dark picture of a bitter janitor who hated his successful, brilliant wife. I described the terrible moment of the explosion. I told the entire world how he locked my door. I described the horrific feeling of suffocating while he stared at me through the glass. He intentionally cut my oxygen. I stated firmly. He tried to murder me to steal the glory. The tribunal gasped in pure horror. The global media exploded with fierce, righteous anger. The world instantly hated Leo. They called him a disgusting space terrorist. They erased his name from all official records. His family was publicly shamed. His legacy was completely, permanently destroyed. I returned to my massive, luxury mansion provided by the government. I drank expensive wine and watched the news. I felt a dark, twisted sense of total victory. I believed I had delivered perfect justice for his cruel betrayal. I thought he finally got exactly what he deserved. I lived in my beautiful, fake reality for exactly 1 year. I bathed in the warm light of global admiration. I was the absolute center of the universe. I had no idea that a quiet, digital ghost was preparing to shatter my entire world into a million bloody pieces. Part 5. The Black Box Speaks. My life in the luxury mansion was incredibly lonely, but very comfortable. I spent my days giving paid speeches about bravery and leadership. One rainy evening, I was sitting alone in my large living room. Suddenly, the security alarm on my front gate beeped softly. A young, nervous man wearing a dark jacket slipped through my back door. I jumped up, ready to call the police. "Please wait," the young man whispered frantically. "I am a data engineer for the space agency. I am not here to hurt you. I brought the truth." He pulled a small, silver digital drive from his pocket. He placed it carefully on my glass coffee table. "The space agency directors are lying to the world," he explained, his hands shaking slightly. "They secretly recovered and decrypted the damaged black box data from your ship last week." I stared at the silver drive, feeling a sudden, cold dread in my stomach. "What is on that drive?" I asked quietly. The engineer looked at me with deep, profound pity. "It contains the exact cause of the disaster," he whispered. "And it contains the hidden security camera footage. The agency directors decided to destroy this data tomorrow," he continued softly. "They do not want the world to know the truth. They want to protect the beautiful story of the brave female hero. But I could not let them erase him. You need to see this." The young engineer turned around and ran out into the rainy night. I was left entirely alone with the small silver drive. My hands trembled violently as I picked it up. I plugged it into my large television screen. A complex series of technical documents appeared first. I read the official engineering report. The words hit my brain like a massive, heavy hammer. The terrible depressurization was not caused by Leo. The ship exploded because the outer titanium hull failed completely. The hull cracked exactly at the spot where the micrometeorite had struck before launch. The terrifying, absolute truth crushed my lungs. The disaster was entirely my fault. If I had delayed the launch for 2 hours to inspect the hull, the crack would have been fixed. My arrogant, selfish desire to look good on television had caused the ship to explode. "I caused the disaster," I whispered to the empty room. "I was the arrogant fool who destroyed the mission. But if the explosion was my fault, why did Leo lock my door? Why did he turn off my oxygen?" I used the remote control to open the next video file. The screen turned black for a second. The words "Classified Interior Security Feed" flashed in bright white letters. The video began to play. I was about to witness the most beautiful, agonizing, and completely devastating act of love in the entire history of the universe. Part 6. The Life-Saving Valve. The security video was silent, but the images were incredibly clear. I watched the recording from the main control room camera. The video showed the exact moment the micrometeorite crack finally shattered the ship's hull. The massive explosion shook the entire vessel violently. I watched my own recorded self run into the survival cabin. I saw myself pull desperately on the door handle. Then, the camera focused perfectly on Leo. He was standing near the main control console. He was looking rapidly at the digital pressure monitors. The data on the screen was terrifying. The explosive decompression was tearing the outer corridors apart. The vacuum of space was sucking all the air out of the ship. Leo realized a fatal, horrific fact. The pressure inside my survival cabin was dangerously higher than the hallway. If I opened that glass door in my panic state, the massive pressure difference would create a violent, explosive vacuum. I would have been instantly, brutally sucked out of the cabin and thrown directly into the freezing darkness of deep space. My body would have been destroyed. Leo did not lock the door to trap me. He locked the door to physically prevent me from opening it and committing accidental suicide. He grabbed the manual override to keep the heavy glass perfectly sealed. He was actively trying to keep me safe inside the reinforced box. But the danger was not over. The video showed me screaming and slamming my fists against the glass. I was burning precious oxygen rapidly in my blind panic. The life support systems on the ship were failing completely. There was almost no breathable air left in the tanks. Leo knew that if I continued to scream and panic, I would consume the remaining oxygen in minutes and die anyway. He needed to slow my heart rate down immediately. He needed my brain to consume less air. He made a brilliant, terrifying tactical decision. He walked to the environmental panel and grabbed the heavy lever. He pulled it down, intentionally cutting the oxygen flow to my cabin. He did not do it to murder me. He cut the air to force my body into a rapid, unconscious state. He wanted me to faint quickly. By starving me of oxygen for a few minutes, he forced my panicked brain to shut down. He forced my body into a state of deep, unnatural sleep. A sleeping body consumes a fraction of the oxygen a panicked body uses. He choked me just enough to save my life. I watched myself slide down the glass door and pass out on the video. Leo did not smile or look relieved. He looked absolutely terrified and completely heartbroken. He touched the thick glass gently, crying silent tears. He had successfully sedated me, but his impossible mission was just beginning. Part 7. The Transferred Breath. The silent security video continued to play on my large screen. I sat on my expensive sofa, tears pouring uncontrollably down my face. My husband had just saved me from explosive decompression. But the ship's main computer was flashing critical warnings. The primary oxygen reserves were completely gone. The ship only had a tiny amount of emergency battery power left. The artificial intelligence system spoke through a text prompt on the main screen. The system detected 2 living humans on board. But there was only enough power and oxygen to sustain one single life support sector. The computer presented Leo with a cold, brutal choice. He had to manually select which sector would receive the final, remaining resources. He had to choose between the command cabin and the engineering deck. He had to choose who would live and who would die in the dark. Leo did not hesitate for a single second. He did not think about his own survival. He immediately typed my command sector into the computer. He actively chose to divert all remaining power to my locked room. But the computer warned him that the actual oxygen levels were still too low for my long journey home. Even in a deep sleep, my body needed more air than the broken ship could provide. Leo looked around the failing control room. He made a decision that completely shattered my arrogant, selfish soul. He walked to the emergency locker and pulled out his heavy gray spacesuit. He put the suit on quickly. The suit had a small, personal oxygen tank attached to the back. It was designed to keep an engineer alive for a few hours during repairs. It was his only personal protection against the deadly vacuum of space filling the ship. Leo did not connect the suit's helmet to his own head. Instead, He carried the heavy suit directly to the main ventilation pipe that fed into my locked survival cabin. He used his heavy wrench to break the metal cover off the pipe. He exposed the main air intake valve. He connected the thick, plastic breathing hose from his personal spacesuit directly into my ventilation system. He twisted the valves, locking the connection perfectly. He manually diverted his own personal, life-saving oxygen supply directly into my room. He was literally giving me his own breath. He stood next to the pipe, taking deep, desperate breaths of the thin, freezing air in the control room. He pumped the oxygen from his tank straight into my sleeping lungs. He was trading his own precious air to ensure I had enough to survive the long, automatic flight back to Earth. He gave up his final, tiny chance of survival. He stripped away his own armor to build a perfect, invisible shield around me. He stood in the dying ship, slowly suffocating, pouring his own life directly into the woman who had slapped his face and cursed his name. Part 8: Death in the Vacuum. The video feed switched to a different camera located in the lower engineering deck. The air in the main control room was completely gone. Leo had to retreat to the lowest, smallest compartment on the ship. It was a tiny metal waste disposal room. It was basically a dark closet. He floated into the small room and closed the heavy metal door tightly. He was entirely alone. The computer system in this room still had a tiny bit of power. The artificial intelligence detected his presence. The system automatically tried to divert a small fraction of oxygen to keep him alive. Leo saw the green light flash on the wall panel. He knew that if the computer shared the air, my supply would be reduced. He refused to let the machine take a single drop of oxygen away from my sleeping body. He grabbed a heavy metal tool from the wall. He raised his arm and smashed the life support control panel violently. He destroyed the delicate electronics completely. Sparks flew into the dark room. He intentionally, permanently disabled the life support system for his own compartment. He sealed himself inside an absolute, inescapable vacuum. I watched him drop the heavy tool. He floated in the center of the dark, freezing room. The lack of pressure and oxygen began to destroy his body immediately. He grabbed his throat with both hands. His mouth opened wide in a silent, agonizing scream for air that did not exist. The tiny blood vessels in his eyes burst, turning them completely dark red. He twisted and turned in the zero-gravity environment, suffering unimaginable physical torture. His lungs collapsed. The freezing cold of deep space began to turn his skin a pale, deadly blue. He was dying a horrific death. But in his final, agonizing moments, he did not look angry or scared. His shaking hands reached into the pocket of his gray uniform. He pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was an old, faded photograph of me. It was a picture from our wedding day. He held the picture in front of his bleeding red eyes. He looked at my smiling face. His body was suffering absolute hell, but a gentle, beautiful smile formed on his freezing lips. He pressed the photograph against his chest, right over his dying heart. He stopped fighting the vacuum. His arms floated loosely by his sides. He closed his eyes peacefully. The freezing temperature turned his final tear into a solid piece of ice. He died completely alone in the dark, giving his very last heartbeat to the woman who called him a monster. The video ended, leaving a frozen image of his blue, smiling face on my screen. I fell off my expensive sofa. I screamed a loud, animalistic scream of pure, absolute devastation. My soul was completely, irreversibly ripped apart. I was entirely covered in the heavy, crushing blood of my savior. Part 9. The Medal of Hypocrisy. I lay on the floor of my massive mansion, vomiting from the intense, suffocating guilt. I could not breathe. I had publicly destroyed the reputation of a saint. I had called my savior a terrorist. I grabbed the silver drive and ran out of my house. I drove wildly to the space agency headquarters. I burst through the heavy glass doors, screaming for the high directors. I threw the silver drive onto their large, polished conference table. I know the truth. I yelled hysterically, tears streaming down my face. I saw the video. I caused the explosion. Leo saved me. We have to tell the world right now. The three older men sitting at the table did not look shocked. They did not look guilty. They looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. One of the directors slowly picked up the silver drive and dropped it into a glass of water, destroying the electronics instantly. "We already know the truth, Elena," the director said with a chilling, calm voice. "We watched the video months ago." I stared at him, my mind completely paralyzed. "If you know he is innocent, why did you let me ruin his name?" I begged. "Why did you let the world hate him?" The director stood up and leaned across the table. "Because the world does not need the truth," he whispered sharply. "The world needs a beautiful, inspiring hero. They need a brave female commander who survived a terrorist attack. They do not need to know their hero is an arrogant, stupid fool who crashed a billion-dollar ship. They actively chose to bury his incredible sacrifice to protect their public relations image. They preferred a fake hero over a dead, heroic janitor. If you tell the media the truth, no one will believe you." The director threatened softly. "We will say your brain damage makes you delusional. We will lock you in a psychiatric ward forever." He walked around the table and placed a heavy, golden object in my shaking hands. It was the Space Cross, the highest medal of honor on Earth. "You will attend the ceremony tomorrow," he commanded. "You will smile for the cameras. You will accept this medal, and you will never speak his name again. If you refuse, we will ruin his family. We will destroy everything he ever cared about." The director smiled a cruel, evil smile. I looked at the shiny gold medal in my hands. It felt incredibly heavy, covered in the invisible, freezing blood of my husband. I was completely trapped. I could not save his legacy without destroying his innocent family on Earth. The agency forced me to become the ultimate, disgusting hypocrite. I was forced to stand on a bright stage the next day, smiling for billions of people, wearing a medal bought entirely with my husband's agonizing death. Part 10. Prisoner of the Atmosphere. Many long years have passed since the terrible disaster in deep space. I am still the most famous, beloved woman on the entire planet. I am extremely wealthy. I live in a massive, beautiful estate near the ocean. But my perfect, luxurious life is actually a permanent, inescapable hell. The mild brain damage from the oxygen deprivation left me with a horrific psychological curse. I suffer from severe, paralyzing claustrophobia. I absolutely cannot be inside a closed room. If I see a door close, my brain instantly returns to that dark survival cabin. I feel the cold glass against my hands. I had to completely destroy my own home. I hired workers to tear down every single interior wall in my massive mansion. There are no doors in my house. My bedroom is completely open to the cold wind and the rain. I must constantly feel the air moving around me, or my mind violently breaks. I sit alone on my open terrace, wearing thick blankets. The world thinks I am an eccentric, artistic genius. They do not know I am a broken, terrified prisoner. I stare up at the dark, starry sky every single night. I look at the vast, cold universe where I left my heart. The most agonizing torture is the simple act of breathing. Every time I take a deep breath of fresh, clean earth air, I am violently reminded of the vacuum. I remember the exact image of his blue, freezing face. I remember him clawing at his throat in the dark. I know with absolute, terrifying certainty that my life is entirely stolen. Every heartbeat I experience was purchased with his silent, freezing death. The massive, endless atmosphere of this beautiful planet feels incredibly heavy in my damaged lungs. The air tastes like deep, bitter ash. Sometimes, when the wind blows through my open house, I fall to my knees. I wrap my hands around my own throat, gasping and crying. I beg the empty sky for an impossible forgiveness. I apologize to the silent stars, hoping his ghost can hear my endless, pathetic sorrow. I am surrounded by billions of tons of free oxygen. I have the entire world at my feet. But I am permanently, incurably suffocating. I am a celebrated hero trapped inside a beautiful, invisible cage. I am slowly drowning in the air he died to give me, waiting patiently for the day my stolen breath finally runs out.